All right, friends, thanks for joining. So, we are doing a little Circle Way Guardian training today. So, some of you I know participated after the election in some circles that we did on Zoom. And this is basically just a tool for how we get together, communicate with each other, hold space. Um, yeah, to just listen to each other. So, what I would like to do, actually, I'm going to Okay, so what we'll do is just kind of walk through kind of what the purpose of the circle is, give a little bit of background on like where it comes from, and then there is a Guardian guide that you should be able to get a link to. That's a Google Doc that will kind of give you like the structure that we'll work with together. And then this group will practice, but I'll stop the recording before we do that. So basically, as I mentioned, the Circle Way is just a really cool tool for deep listening, being together, and honoring each other with receiving whatever others have to share. So in a time when debating and arguing and shaming and shouting are all too common, um, we think it's just really important as a church and in other ways in our lives and communities to create space to pause, to be together, to honor whatever it is that the others are carrying. And since we are a really diverse community, it's also a way of just honoring that everybody in this community, everybody that we interact with has different experiences, has different burdens and joys and hopes that they carry. So the circle way is a particular approach to gathering in circles, but it's helpful to know and to kind of acknowledge that there are a lot of people and groups who have like teachings and trainings on circles. And so this isn't in any way like the right or the best approach. And it's also not rigid. Like that's part of the point of the circle. So any guidelines that I offer or anything that we talk about today, um, it's meant to be adapted for your context, for the needs. It's meant to serve you and the people that you're meeting with. So know that. Um, so there is a website, thecircleway.net, where you can get a little more info on this. And my experience with this is based off of that specific sort of training. So I'll be using that as a guide. But we encourage any of you who have other trainings in circle process, circle gatherings, we'd love to hear from you, maybe even have you teach us what you know. So yeah, so just as far as why we're doing this as a church, we as on the D&D team um, have agreed that at these town halls, this would be a really special way to just connect with each other. It's really nice that we're meeting every month to kind of share updates and not just share updates, but like hear from everybody in the church, you know, and really be in dialogue about where we're headed together and who we are. And sometimes we just need to pause the dialogue and hold whatever we're each holding and carrying together. So that's how we're going to start practicing this more consistently. So we figured since D&D we're going to get kind of comfortable with this guardian process, we might as well put it out there for everyone in the church, because this may be a tool that you find to be valuable at work or, you know, in relationships that you're in. So we hope that yeah, you'll be kind of courageous and curious about it and try it out in whatever community you may be part of. So you can read more about kind of the context on that Google Doc, but I'll dive into more of like the how of kind of what this looks like now. So the circle is a gathering. Typically, ideally, of course, we would love for this to be a physical circle that we can all sit in chairs and be close to each other, closer than 6 feet apart. Right now, it's a virtual circle. So it's the circle is held by the collective group. So it's not just about being in that physical circle, but being in that like communion circle together. And so there's no one person who's in charge, which is why the name is guardian. It's not like leader or even, I mean, facilitator's fine. Like those words are fine, but the intent of the word guardian is there's just sort of a keeper that keeps things flowing and makes sure that the agreements that the group makes are like honored and maintained. So the group gathers with some sort of structure. We're going to give you that kind of agenda that you can follow in a way. And the guardian is the person who walks through that for the group. And often we'll say, if a circle is going to meet more regularly rather than just kind of like a one-off, we would encourage that you switch who is the guardian. So there's not just like a fixed guardian, that it's a more shared role in the group. And basically, they're just managing the flow and, like I mentioned, making sure the group abides by its agreements. So there are recommended agreements in the document that you can check out that are just helpful, kind of baseline. So some examples are: speak from the heart, listen from the heart, tend to the well-being of the circle, so remain aware of the impact of our contributions, don't rehearse, fix, help, control, or judge, and be expressive. So that's sort of the lean in, lean back thing. If you know you tend to be a big sharer, practice leaning back. And if you tend to hold back a lot from the group, practice leaning in. And then one of the things we'll talk about that is also in agreement is hold all in confidence. So we'll talk about that confidentiality later. So those are just some examples, but every circle is different. And so the group may decide to have different agreements from those. And the guardian will just be the person that helps to make sure that folks are abiding by those. So once the circle kind of gathers and the guardian's been assigned, typically we begin with like a silence and or prayer. So you might bring a reading, you might bring a poem or a specific prayer that is really meaningful to you, and then practicing at least 2 minutes of silence together. And that silence is really just about, again, like this is a very countercultural practice, unfortunately. And we live in a world that has a lot of noise and chaos and activity. And so the silence is helping us to recenter and ground ourselves in what's real and in the quiet where God is waiting to meet us. So I definitely encourage at least 2 minutes. And if your group wants to do more, that's great too. And then you would just move into a check-in round where folks can share. If you have more time, you do a check-in round. If you don't, then you'll just go straight into questions. So there are some example questions in this guide. Some of them are, what's on your heart today? How have you seen or experienced God recently? Who do you need God to be to you right now? But they can be anything. They can even be topical. And then every person in the circle is invited to share a response to each question that's asked. It's expected that everyone will share, and that doesn't mean that everyone has to give a full response. They can just say, I don't have anything to offer, or I'd like to pass. But that's just the acknowledgement that everyone has a turn to share in the circle. And then once everyone's shared, then the guardian would move on to the next question. So that's kind of the flow of it. And once you've gotten through however many questions you have time for and questions and responses, then you would close with like a witnessing round, which can look like anything. It's often like, what's one word for how you're feeling as we leave the circle? And then you close in prayer or silence again, or maybe a reading. So that's kind of the flow. The last couple things I'll mention are just more logistical, for how you make sure that the circle is protected. And one of those is that there's no crosstalk in this version of circle meeting. So this is a very hard one for a lot of us, because we do live in a world and in a culture where there's a lot of value on dialogue and on, giving each other our own experiences. And while that's a beautiful thing, and this is not meant to dismiss that and or replace those spaces where we teach or support each other, it's a space where we just allow people to share what they've shared and let that be enough. That we are receiving it is our act of love and care, and we don't have to engage with it beyond that. And that doesn't mean you can't wrestle with it later and think about it more, but we don't really even encourage that it's not encouraged that you like follow up on questions about things people share in circle. That's part of the holding in confidence, is that it's really like, this is the container where we are sharing these things, and we protect that and we leave it there. So whenever one person speaks, it's helpful to kind of practice a thank you, because like it's an honor to receive what someone's carrying or what they're being willing to share. So you can say thank you however you'd like. If you're on Zoom and you're all muted, you can just say thank you and they'll see your lips move. I like, and the group that I'm part of likes to do like a bow. If that's weird for you, that's okay. You can do like one of these or one of these, whatever your group agrees on, but just an acknowledgement of thanks and and appreciation. And then that's it. And then it moves on to the next person, no commenting or referencing later. So then when you're sharing, don't, as much as possible, avoid commenting on something that someone else has shared, even if it somewhat inspires what you have to say. And then the last thing is confidentiality. So I've mentioned this already. It's a container that we're creating, and so you keep everything that's shared in there. It's really important to honor that there is vulnerability in this practice, and that when people share things in circle, it's with a sense of trust. So we don't talk to people who weren't participating in the circle about whatever's shared. And then, as I mentioned, whatever's shared shouldn't be like followed up on later. This one can be complicated because sometimes there can be really like messy things that come out, things that other people say may be harmful in some way to you, and you may need to process that. And so that's part of why we want to do this training too, because as we're practicing in this as news story, we just want there to be kind of like an avenue for folks to follow up. So if you are able to like pursue clarity about what might have arisen for you with your guardian, that's kind of ideal, because that way you're not asking someone who wasn't in the circle to talk through anything with you. And if there is some sort of like conflict resolution that needs to happen there, the guardian is the best person to like join you in that. And you may even need to call a future circle and like use that as a space where you can process. So yeah, that part's a little bit messier if something like that does arise. And if it does, I'm no expert, but I and many of us who have been doing this a little bit longer are happy to like talk through that with you in anonymous terms. So know that. I think that is everything that you should know to just go out there and try being a guardian. Let me just scroll through and see if I missed anything important here. No, I think that's it. So I will invite questions from the D&D members who are on the call today. And then if any of you have questions later, certainly you can email me, you can post a message on social media, and we'll get back at you. But any questions from you all?
Well, I just want to start by saying thank you. Yeah, and I feel convicted, especially about the oversharing part. And yeah, I think the crosstalk thing, as you said, it's really important. And I guess my kind of question is like, yeah, if it gets messy, what happens? Um, but I assume that that's something that we will continue to wrestle with and continue to figure out as we participate in these trainings. So I'm just super grateful for you, Lori, and can't wait to learn more. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Javier. And I guess I should say too, because I didn't mention from like what my own experience with this is. I don't have like a ton of experience. I've really only done this with one group. But when I was in the living school for a couple of years, I learned about this. I had a small group that they call a circle group that I met with throughout that 2 years, and we still meet twice a month. And so that's the only like context where I've practiced this. But it's been one of the most beautiful, like nourishing experiences, and ways of just, yeah, of realizing how different it is and how rejuvenating it can be to just even notice what I'm feeling and what I need to release and share and communicate. But then to receive that from others, it's a real gift. So yeah, it can certainly get messy, but the beauty is that while I mentioned you can follow up with the guardian, the beauty is that the circle is held by the whole group. So when there are any like violations to those agreements, it's usually pretty easy for the group to kind of self-regulate and work through that. So but yeah, questions are always welcome. Any other thoughts or feedback or questions?
Um, I don't have anything. I've never mentioned this, and I don't know why, but like 6 or 7 years ago, I actually got to do like a retreat, like a 2 day circle keeping retreat. So this is all really familiar. Some language is a little different, but that's it. So yeah, thank you for reviewing it. And the only other thing that was really the crosstalk thing. One thing that we would also really try to encourage students, because I did it through like a high school. Yes, Javier, restorative practices. Yeah. It was in a I was teaching in Wisconsin at the time, so it's called Circle Space Services, and it's a woman named Chris who's been doing this for a long time. But we went and stayed in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. It was really nice. But anyway, one thing that I don't know if this is something that you have experienced, Lori, but even with like our body language, we can crosstalk. And so that was one thing that we really had to, and that I would get called out on a lot because I like nod or like even engage with like my eyes, like I try to be an active audience member. So that felt really counterintuitive to me. But I do think that that was important for me to check as I was in the circle, was like not to be overly responsive with my body language too. Yeah.
That's so, thank you so much for saying that. And really exciting to hear that you had that training. I didn't know that. I'm really glad you mentioned that actually, because Zoom makes that totally like extra important, because when you're in a physical circle, it's easier to like choose where your attention is, right? You can like look at your feet, you can look at the ceiling when you're sharing if you want to like disengage from reactions. But Zoom, you're just like so um, yeah, you're so attentive to people's responses. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's, yeah, really important
Yeah.
to
That's a
regulate.
good point.
Awesome. Well, no pressure, but any other questions before we stop the recording and try this practice for ourselves? Cool beans. Well, thank you to all who are choosing to watch this in your free time. Again, if you have questions, I'm sure I am definitely not, as like Emily just mentioned, she's been trained. I'm sure there are a lot of you who have experienced this sort of thing. Hit us up with your wisdom. And yeah, looking forward to practicing this with you all soon at upcoming town halls. Bye.